Jimmy booked us a luxury Airbnb cabin for our 3-year wedding anniversary. A gorgeous lake was only 300 yards away. The host Mary was there to greet us when we first arrived on that Friday evening. She gave us the keys and provided a quick tour. I was head over heels in love with the place. The next day, Jimmy and I took a nice coastal stroll toward the lake. It was a scorching hot summer day. Normally I love warm weather, but this was far too strong to deal with. The sun's heat hovered over us aggressively as we walked up a gravel path. We finally reached the lake. We sat down at a picnic table that faced the glimmering water. Thankfully a tree stood over us, which cast a nice patch of shade. We sat there for around an hour or so enjoying the lake's view and talking about our day-to-day lives. My eyes randomly glanced over to the other side of the lake. A topless middle-aged man wearing camouflaged green shorts watched our every movement. He was sat at a picnic table by himself, taking small sips of the bottled water he held in his right hand. His chest showcased a scarlet-red sunburn. It looked severely painful, but the man didn't seem fazed by it whatsoever. Jimmy and I both looked at each other as if to say, "Creepy guy." Alert, the man stood to his feet and walked towards the edge of the lake. The tips of his boots levitated over the water. Jimmy tapped my forearm and motioned to the path with his head. We both got up from the table and started moving back up the winding path. I couldn't help but glance back every few seconds. The man watched us until we were longer within view. A few hours later, I was sat on a garden chair on the cabin's front deck smoking a cigarette. I had almost forgotten about the weird man Jimmy and I encountered earlier in the day. Jimmy was in the midst of having a shower. I declined the offer to join him, despite being mildly tempted. Nothing specific was on my mind. I just listened to the relaxing ambience that circled me, not wanting it to end. The ambience vanished abruptly when a blood-curdling scream made itself known. My eyes darted into the distance, toward where the violent scream came from. A lanky figure of a tree entered my vision. The tree itself isn't what I was focused on. I could see clear as day that the man from the lake was standing behind it. Quarter of his body was barely visible. His exposed eye was looking directly at me. I froze. I didn't know how to react to the situation. I cautiously stood to my feet, trying not to alarm the man, and then headed back inside the cabin. I ran to the bathroom door and pounded on it with urgency. "What's wrong?" Jimmy swung open the door. Before I could say anything, another loud disturbing scream entered my hearing. It sounded close. I walked toward the lounge window. The man in the camouflage shorts was now standing 3 feet away from the cabin. The look he had in his eyes was one that truly terrified me. I noticed he had what appeared to be an unlit Molotov cocktail, which made me more terrified instantly. "Is that the creep from the lake?" said Jimmy. I didn't respond. I made sure I locked the front door, as well as the back, but really we should have ran for it. Jimmy called the police, and they arrived within 10 to 15 minutes as we hoped for the best. The man started running up the path toward the lake when he spotted the patrol car. He lit the cocktail and launched it towards the cops and kept running. The police gave chase, but they lost him somehow. That was the last we saw of him. Despite reassurance from the police, they will find him, Jimmy and I no longer felt safe at the cabin. Early the next morning, we packed our things and left. I have so many questions regarding this event. I don't know who that man was or what his intentions were, but thank God the police turned up when they did. I moved into the 2-bedroomed Airbnb around late June of 2022, in the middle of nowhere. Across from it was an old abandoned barn that looked like something out of a horror movie. I wasn't really bothered by it or anything, but I more than likely would have passed on the home had I seen it in one of the listed website photos. The house, though, looked even better in person. I booked the Airbnb for 6 weeks because I just needed to get away from everything for a while. My head was all over the place. I had just recently been dumped by my girlfriend of 5 years. It was quite the shock. She didn't love me anymore. Plain and simple. She said as much quite bluntly. I had no choice but to accept it and try to move on. But first, I needed to get my head straight. What was meant to be a 6-week stay only ended up being 3. Why, well, let me explain as best as I can. One night, I was sat in the living room well into my rewatch of 2.5 Men's second season, one of my favorite shows. I was specifically watching the episode where Charlie dates Jake's school teacher Miss Pasternak. My full attention was ripped away from the TV upon hearing a traditional knock at the front door. I rose from the couch and approached, thinking that perhaps the host had stopped by. He had done so a few times before. He lived just a mile away, next to a graveyard of all places. I opened the door to find no one there. Only the breezy October night greeted me. Someone playing at the door, I asked myself with uncertainty. It seemed like a rather odd location to do that sort of thing, and I hadn't seen any kids hanging around at any point during my stay. I wasn't sure what to think. I confusingly closed the door and headed back to the living room. As my body entered the doorway, someone knocked at the door again. Only, the knock sounded a little louder this time. I went back to the front door, opening it a tad faster. Once again, no one was there. I slammed the door in annoyance and paced back to the couch. I sat down and unpaused the TV, saying some rather unpleasant words under my breath. Not even 5 minutes later, the knocking resumed. They were slower than the previous two, and much more aggressive sounding. I chose not to inspect this time. I just sat there, painfully listening to the harsh knocks that tried to ruin my evening. It continued for 3 whole minutes. Not once was there any kind of brief break during that time. The knocking was relentless. When it finally stopped, I was skeptical. I didn't actually start to believe it was over until half an hour had passed. I breathed a sigh of relief. I watched 3 more episodes of 2.5 Men and then went up to bed. I made sure to lock the door before heading upstairs. It took me a while to drift off for obvious reasons. Hours later, I reluctantly awoke from my sleep at around 3 a.m. My sleepy eyes shot open. For a second I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again. The sounds were far too vicious to be a part of a dream. The knocking had returned. I couldn't believe it. I sat up in the single bed, listening to the loud knocks. They sounded so heavy that I was semi-convinced that a hand was gonna burst through the front door at any minute. They abruptly stopped again. I waited for 2 minutes, then got out of bed. I descended down the stairs wearing nothing but a white t-shirt and boxers. I edged toward the door. I unlocked and gingerly opened it. The cold night smothered my exposed skin. The empty road was all that I noticed initially. Then, for whatever reason, my eyes moved toward the barn in the distance. They widened at the sight. Someone wearing a black fur hooded winter coat stood watching me. The hood over their head and the night hid their face. It was definitely a man, but I couldn't tell whether or not he was old or young. He was as still as a statue. Not once did I see him move a muscle. The creepy barn behind him only amplified my fear. Then I was quickly terrified as he started running my way with something in his hand. I locked the front door once more, well at least I thought I did, as it bounced back open to my surprise as I tried to run upstairs. I had maybe seconds to try to lock the door or keep running. I was able to get it locked and ran like hell upstairs. I checked out of the windows and could not see him anywhere. I sat in bed, terrified for the remainder of the night. When daylight started to emerge, I packed whatever I could and left the home. My eyes scanned the surrounding area as I walked toward my car. The man wasn't within view. It's embarrassing to admit this, I was too tough to call police, but too scared to face him, and to this day, the sounds of a hand pounding against a door makes my knees tremble. The image of the hooded knocker is one that had caused me many sleepless nights, and will probably continue to do so.